I have a serious question that requires a serious answer. By a show of hands, how many of you can imagine going to the emergency room 36 times in 1 year? No one? Well, me either. When I first came across this information, I thought to myself, who in the world would want to spend that much time within an emergency room? Maybe it's a matter of convenience based on time. However, that turned out to not be so true, because the national average of time spent in an emergency room from entry to first engagement is 135 minutes, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Multiply that by 36 visits, and you have 77 and a half hours, 3 days, 5 hours, and 30 minutes of your life spent seeking care. That doesn't really sound all that convenient, now does it? Then maybe I thought, maybe it's a matter of cost. I don't have to schedule an appointment. I don't have to sit within a lobby waiting for my doctor to show up while reading a Golf Digest magazine where I can't tell the difference between a wedge and a putter. And also, I don't have to make a copay. However true that may be, there's still some issues associated with that as well. A 2015 study with the New York State Department of Health indicated that in 2014, the last comprehensive study, there were 6.4 million emergency room visits in New York State alone. 71% of those were deemed avoidable. And what does that mean? That means if someone had immediate access to care or executed a solid plan of care, they would have likely avoided that emergency room visit. So we think about it from a healthcare economics standpoint. What is the overall cost of that? $1.3 billion. So this speaks to a more significant issue. So in healthcare, we tend to look at numbers. Data is our savant. We can create pie charts, line graphs, bar graphs, and an occasional pivot table. It helps us understand the ebbs and flows of how healthcare is consumed among our patient population. However, they do not explain the why. We tend to drop the ball in that area quite a bit. And I'll give you an example. Miss Provider, we see that the emergency room utilization of your patient population has risen by 25% in the last quarter. What are you doing to address this issue? Chances are the provider's looking at you with a blank face, and me as the consultant, I'm looking at you with a blank face as well, because neither one of us has any idea on how to solve that issue. So now my next step is to work on a process within the healthcare sphere that helps us look beyond the numbers, to understand the why behind healthcare consumption, especially as it relates to the overutilization of emergency room services. See this pretty lady here on the screen? This is Mary. I'm going to tell you a story about Mary and my engagement with her by learning about her barriers to healthcare. And I'm just going to give you a disclaimer off the rip. Mary is a 36-time emergency room visitor. And also, I can't take too much credit for it because our meeting was totally by accident. So looking at this, you would think that Mary, would have hit me over the head. So I happen to be visiting her provider group where she seeks her everyday primary care services, when a care manager approached me and said, "Hey, Gary, someone would like to meet you." And typically, when someone wants to meet someone from a healthcare organization, especially health insurance, it's usually for one of three reasons. One, their claim was denied and they are ticked. Second, they hate their provider. Or third, they just hate me. But fortunately for me, this wasn't the case. It was actually the total opposite of what I expected. With meeting Mary, after exchanging pleasantries, hello, how you doing, a long-distance hug, and maybe a handshake, we sat down and began to converse, because I had no idea what she was going to say to me. She actually began to share her story. Mary is a 55-year-old woman managing 2 chronic illnesses. She lives on the 3rd floor of an apartment building that does not have a working elevator. And also, in other news, she has a live-in boyfriend who chronically smokes. Okay, not very juicy, maybe for someone who may be a little nosy, but it didn't really explain what her barriers were. She went further. Mary totes around an oxygen tank everywhere she goes. So with not having an elevator in her 3-story building, she has to carry that oxygen tank up and down 3 flights of stairs every time she leaves her home, creating a serious barrier, a serious detriment for someone who may not be as adequately strong. She also has limited access to transportation, meaning that if she needs to see her doctor in an emergent situation, she has to utilize an ambulance, which is quite costly. I was very upset upon learning this information, not really because she was spending a lot of money from a health insurance perspective, but more so because no one did anything about it. I could not have been that special to be the first person to learn this information. So instead of being upset, I actually decided to do something about it. I worked with her care coordinator as well as a social worker within that practice to investigate some community-based organizations that can immediately assess and impact her needs. We located 2 and connected her with those probably within a month or so of learning of her barriers. Here's the results. Within 2 months of my connection with Mary and the subsequent connection with the community-based organizations, we moved her to a 1st-floor apartment in a building that actually had a working elevator. Go figure. And the apartment building was actually within 1 mile proximity of her younger sister, who at the time had pledged to assist with transporting her to and from her primary care appointments. That's a significant step in the right direction. Oh, and finally, the chain-smoking boyfriend didn't come along for the ride. It's a good thing. So the impact from a healthcare perspective. Between January and July of 2018, my last contact with Mary, she only went to the emergency room 3 times. Whereas in the previous year, between January and July of 2017, she went to the emergency room 18 times, which is an 83% decrease in ER utilization, as well as a $36,000 cost savings from a healthcare perspective. In the end, stories are just data with a soul. It only took one conversation with Mary to help me understand the barriers that impacted her ability to connect with her primary care physician and told me the why behind her desire to utilize the emergency room, unfortunately. So it wasn't just data that helped me understand her issues and help me solve for them. It wasn't pie charts, it wasn't line graphs, it wasn't bar graphs, or the occasional pivot table used to help understand what it was that Mary needed and what we needed to do from a healthcare perspective to help her get to where she needs to go, to where her condition is manageable. So in the end, it was Mary's story that did the work. It was her why that did the work. And it was also the ability to look beyond the numbers. Thank you.